Is not unique in the sense that we have seen reports prior to the 2006 report disclose mismanagement and apparent abuses of public funds. So in that way it's not unique. Why it is unique to me is the extent of disclosure this time and the nature of the revelations. It's not unique because the Auditor General has not done that before, but the extent of the matters that have been highlighted. And all of this to me points to a systemic failure on the part of the government. Because we're not only talking about money, but we're talking about the process of accountability that goes with the use of money. We're talking about the system by which money is used. We're talking about the lack of accountability and the lack of transparency. So when I look at the Auditor General's report for 2006, that is the one thing that grabs my attention immediately. How on earth could things have got this bad without us knowing? And if things are this bad, why have we consistently voted the same administration in each election? And I think at the heart of any discussion of this nature is that crucial question, and I'll be coming back to it in the course of my presentation this evening. But I'd like to also say that the Auditor General should be congratulated, I think, for having had the fortitude to issue the kind of report that he did this year. And while some of us can quibble and say it could have been better, it could have been more comprehensive, when we look at the overall system that we have in this country and the kind of pressures that are brought to bear on persons attempting to discharge public function, I think we must recognize that he has done a credible job of the 2006 report. And I think we should reflect our gratitude for that. Because just like everybody else, people who are trying to do the right thing in government also need the support of civil society, just as those who are trying to do the right thing outside government. Now we hear so much about the separation of powers, and when we talk about the separation of powers, we usually think about the three primary organs of state. So we talk of the legislature, we talk of the executive, and we talk of the judiciary. And while we tend to think of Parliament as a venue for lawmaking, and for the exchange of abuse and insults and the display of homophobia and various other interesting things that Malaysians are quite unique for, we often tend to overlook the fact that Parliament is a very, very crucial mechanism for the control of finance of the nation. And the Constitution has quite a few provisions dedicated to just financial controls through Parliament. Now, one of the mechanisms by which this control is supposed to be exercised in theory, not in practice, and I say that because, as was pointed out by the first speaker, we have great laws, we don't have great enforcement. And we don't seem to have the will to enforce the laws we have. We have state-of-the-art laws on a lot of things, but unfortunately we have third world mentality when it comes to the enforcement of those laws. So when I speak of Parliament and its role in financial control, I'm of course speaking theoretically. Perhaps Dr. Shari can add to what I'm saying. So one of the crucial mechanisms in this control is the Auditor General and the Office of the Auditor General. And I think people tend to get confused. I was confused as well for a while because we look at this man and we think he's a man. Yeah, he is a man. He's not a woman. He could be a woman. I mean, not him, but he's somebody else in the office. But what we're actually talking about is the office itself. And the office itself is created by the Constitution. Now that's very important because we hear Nazri talking about how the Elections Commission is subordinate to Parliament, and that's wrong because the Election Commission is actually created by the Constitution. What that means is, putting it in very simple terms, is that the Election Commission, the Auditor General, the Attorney General to the extent that the law provides, is actually an office or an agency provided or created by the Constitution, which means it sits on the same level as the executive, as the legislature and the judiciary. And in the case of the Auditor General, the Constitution actually clearly provides that he has the same security, the same safeguards as a judge of the superior courts of this country. And the idea there is to protect the office from undue influence and undue pressure, to allow the Auditor General to do what he has to do without fear or favor. And that's a very important aspect of this discussion. So I'd say that the Auditor General, in my view, is only subordinate to the Constitution, and to the extent that the Constitution permits the law. He is not answerable to the executive. He is not answerable to the legislature. He is not answerable to the judiciary, except where he has transgressed the legal limits of his office. So he is an independent agency all of his own. And in being independent in that way, he owes a trust obligation to the nation. Now, more importantly, it means therefore that when he says something in his report, and I don't mean to be sexist, and I'm not gender specific, current AG is a man, so I'm going to say he. When the Auditor General, when he says something in his report, it means that it has great force. In itself, what he has disclosed, what he has revealed in his audit report, is reason in itself for the government to act. And to not only act, but to act meaningfully and decisively and effectively. So, it therefore falls to us to consider whether the government is actually doing this. And this is the next part of my presentation. Now, very interestingly, what we have, and I heard this just this morning from somebody very senior in the government structure, and I won't name names, but what I was told this morning was, what are you talking about? This government is interested in doing good. Look at the Auditor General's report this year. Now that to me is a fundamental misconception on the part of this person speaking. Although I can understand why he said it, because in Malaysia everything is connected to the government and to UMNO. But when you think about it, if this man, the Auditor General, is supposed to be independent and he's supposed to be under the Constitution, he deserves credit for the report, not the government. The Auditor General's report is not the government's report. And if the government is claiming credit for the extent of disclosure this time round, it is an admission by the government that in previous years, the government has interfered with the audit process. So when you read in the newspapers of how this government is claiming credit for being open and transparent and accountable and pointing to the Auditor General, just remember that is the same thing as when the Deputy Minister for Interior Affairs pointed to Justice Hishamuddin and says, see, because he granted judgment against the government, we have an independent judiciary. It's ridiculous. So, the only way the government can claim credit for doing the right thing where the Auditor General's report is concerned is by showing through action that it is committed to doing the right thing. So let's look at that. It's my suggestion, I've written this here, that because the office of the Attorney General is one of high constitutionality, it is morally and legally incumbent upon the government of this country to take steps, to take action. But what have we seen so far? Beyond the rhetoric. We've heard a lot of rhetoric, but we've seen very little action. Lots of movement, but very little done. So we have 10 arrests, grand total of 10, 8 of whom were civil servants, 2 of whom were not. 10. And who were they? Who were these people? They were people at the lower end of the round. We had Dr. Shari Samad for the public.